Hey guys, 2D Man here, and today we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of Ganyu. And hopefully, maybe that'll help you in deciding whether you should try to grab a copy of her or not. Now, Ganyu is a cryo DPS that has been released and has been in the game for about over a year now. And she has proved to be able to accomplish and face any kind of massive challenge that put up against her. One of the strongest DPS units in the game. She's a solid pick, especially if you're newer to the game. But for those who are veterans and have been playing for a little longer, we're going to dive deep into the pros and cons of this character. Now, I do want to point out that some of these pros and cons, some of them will be subjective. So let's go ahead and cut straight into it. So let's start out by talking about her pros. So first of all, she is a cryo DPS. And she can apply cryo on demand by just using charge shots. What I mean by applying cryo on demand is something that only very few cryo characters can do, them being Ayaka and Ganyu. Meaning she doesn't need to rely on cooldowns or any skill ability to provide her cryo. She has the ability to do it with just the charge shot. That is in itself very powerful, especially in the current abyss where you have a lot of enemies that need cryo to pierce through their shields. Another thing that's very critical that I wanted to point out is that even while she's a great DPS, she's also a great support. This is really critical, and it might seem trivial to some of you, but the fact that she can be a support as well as a DPS is very big. Not many DPSs can be played in both slots, and Ganyu is a perfect example of a character that does both of them very well. She's a very good cryo support with a huge AoE burst that not only provides 20% cryo damage bonus, but also provides a very good way of consistently applying cryo for those that are running cryo freeze comps. Now, this does downplay when you use a melt comp. For many instances, you don't want to use her burst because it applies too much cryo, and you'd rather utilize your pyro reverse melt from your charge shot. Another thing I really want to stress is that she has limitless range. Many characters in this game have great range, but they are limited to the AoE or the area which they can cover with their attacks. Ganyu doesn't have to worry about this. Whether you have an enemy or mob or boss that tries to evade you or spaces themselves afar from you, you can still reach them with Ganyu. And this is why her charge shot is very good. But this is a pro and a con. While using charge shot, you are vulnerable to enemy attacks. Now, some people will find a way to mitigate this by using a thick shield or finding the correct way to unzoom, basically, and just dash and try to get good, right? So there's either the stress life of being a archer where you would rather be at distance at shooting the enemy, or you're going to be right in their face. Either way, you're going to be dealing the same damage. You just have to worry about your enemy hitting you or not. Nicely, she does have her E ability, which pulls the aggro from enemies. And for those who are wondering, for the aggro, basically enemies will detect her E ability as a target that they want to attack, and thus giving you an escape door to evade them and shoot from a safe distance. This won't always be the case, and you can't 100% rely on it, but it is a nice little tool that she can use at her disposal. Another pro about Ganyu is artifact sets. The Blizzard Strayer set, in my opinion, is one of the strongest artifact sets in the game. And the fact that it makes building characters a lot easier, especially when you're trying to achieve high crit ratios. What this does is it makes getting enough crit rate on your character a lot easier, to the point where you can basically focus on crit damage. Ideally, you want to sit within the 30% crit rate for your character, and the rest you would like to focus more on crit damage. This is where I would say it really benefits her, and this artifact set makes all cryo users really good. Before, on her initial launch, she did not have access to this artifact set. In fact, the only artifact set that was truly good on her was the Wanderer's 4-piece, which is still her best in slot, in my opinion, and for melt comps. But at the time, this was the only thing that you could farm, and you could only do it by farming bosses. Thankfully, we do have access we do have another way to access this. And that other way of accessing is through the strong box. It's called the Mystic Offering, but a lot of people know it as the strong box. Essentially what you can do is, for the price of 3 artifacts that for instance that you didn't like, or you're farming another domain, you can still get a possible piece within here that could be good. As in a perfect example, that way you could be farming basically one domain for another character, and every time you get a useless artifact that you don't think you'll ever use, you can throw it in here. So you can kind of be farming for Ganyu on the side as well. So this is a way, and a much easier way, to build Ganyu. And I think that's really what really helps her, and I think it's a solid pro, is that her artifact sets are both really good and definitely obtainable a lot easier since her initial release. Now, when we go into the cons, let's go into this, okay? So when those were some of the pros, now that we've captured a couple of those, I want to go into the cons, because I do know that she's a great character, but every character does have some weaknesses, and some pros can also be cons. Okay, so like I mentioned, she uses charge shots, so that can also be a con. The fact that you have to be reliably good at dodging or have a shield is somewhat of a con to utilize her charge shot. You are prone to being interrupted mid charge shot, which could definitely result in a huge DPS decrease, right, if you get hit. But another con is that you might have no use for her. It depends if you have an open slot for her. Really, most of the time, if you're running an Ayaka team, you most likely will use like a battery from either Diona, you'll have Kazuha, or Mona, or Kokomi. You're kind of running low on open slots, and whether Ganyu being in one of those slots is really good utilization of her is kind of up to how your team works, and whether you'd actually find a spot for her would be good. I had this very same issue with Shinha, where my Ayaka team was perfectly fine as it was, but I really liked Shinha, so I kind of wanted to find out where I could fit her in that team. It ended up that I ended up switching my Ayaka team completely to be played in a different manner. This might be a case that might happen with Ganyu, or maybe you just don't find a spot for her. So let's move on to the subjective pros and cons, okay? So when I mean subjective, this comes down to just opinion, okay? So I've met many people that believe that Ganyu's gameplay is boring, and this is probably to the inherent nature of the charge attack gameplay. Now, it really depends how you like to play personally. I have met people that do like to play from a safe distance, and are naturally people that like to steer towards archer classes in most varieties of different games. Maybe that's you, then she's a perfect solid pick. But if you're not a fan of charge attack or slower gameplay, I would definitely double check before pulling on her and try her out in the trial. Now, that's a personal opinion, so while that is a con, it's also a pro. So as a pro, maybe you really like charge attacks. So as you can see, it can be a pro or a con. The other thing has to do with design. Do you like her design? I personally think her design is a pro. I think she's one of the most beautiful characters in the game, and has one of the most unique designs in the game as well. Now, as far as stories go, whether you like her personality or not, that's another thing. Whatever. Really depends on you, right? So I just want to point out kind of my warning to you to weigh your options as far as pros and cons, whether you think this would be a good investment of your primos or not. I personally have been playing the game since basically a release. When I initially saw her, I wasn't really a fan of her gameplay, so I decided to skip. I have tried a variety of different Ganyus on other friends' accounts due to doing abyss clears and challenges. Recently, I played on one of my friends' accounts, which is a whale, and he had a C6 Ganyu, and I got to play C6 Ganyu. I must say, for C6 Ganyu, it's basically you're a double barrel shotgun. The gameplay's a lot quicker and a lot more fun, but that came at a cost, of course. At C0, which is where most of us will realistically probably be at, it's a lot slower gameplay. I've played it. I must say I didn't like it just like I thought I wouldn't like it. That's when I was using her as a main DPS. I have used her as a support and she was fine and worked great for the uses that I used her for. So when going and her banner comes, I urge you to try her trial before pulling her and seeing if this is a character that you would like. I'd like to hear what your guys' thoughts on Ganyu, what you think of her. I will say she is still one of the strongest DPS, if not the strongest. Her melt and freeze variations are significantly strong, but I do want to send a little warning that if you have an Ayaka already, I do not think you will ever need a Ganyu specifically. But if you like both or you like cryo waifus, I would say, go for it. It's your primo gems. But yeah, anyways, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think of Ganyu? Is she worth it or not? If you're pulling, and if you are, good luck. I wish you guys the best of luck. And until next time, take it easy. 2D Man, over and out.